We're here to talk about the problem of hard-coded secrets and how we can use them to our advantage. They are a real problem. I'm actually going to tell you a couple horror stories here. And if you get scared, like, hey, that could be me, or I lived through that, or I'm just getting nervous, remember to cite the Bene Gesserit litany against fear, and you'll be fine. Only the fear will pass and you'll remain. But Uber had a problem with hard-coded passwords. An attacker got access. We just heard about MFA not being the greatest end-all be-all solution because, well, you can bypass it in certain circumstances. An attacker figured out how they could do that and got through Uber's defenses, fished a superadmin's password, got in, found a bunch of PowerShell scripts chock full of hard-coded credentials, and pwned the entire system. We know about this because that attacker went to the New York Times and said, look what I did to Uber, and made them look bad. And stole a bunch of stuff, and we still don't know the full outcome and repercussions of this, to be honest. CircleCI, probably a lot of people in the audience lived through this at the beginning of the year. They woke up to find their access tokens had been rotated, and that caused some problems for people. An attacker had gotten into a development system, a remote developer's development system, got some malware inside of the CircleCI network that started stealing plain text passwords from places. They used that access to then get into customer accounts and start stealing their access tokens for all sorts of services. Not a great day. The day, though, that they announced this, an independent security researcher also tweeted, my Honeytokens have gone off inside of CircleCI. Something's going on. I think it was about a 2-hour window between that and the announcement. I don't have a fancy slide for this one, but one of the scarier stories in the last couple of years, and at least to me, is this weird perfect storm that happened where someone from AstraZeneca pushes the credentials for their test environment out into GitHub. Not a huge deal, you might think, because, well, that's a test environment. However, another user had pushed actual patient data into that test environment. They've never said exactly how many people were affected. And if you're one of the people that did get an email from them, I would love to know like what they actually said to you as a customer. Because unlike airline crashes, we don't know. We only know what security teams and PR teams are willing to tell us. What's common about all those is what the attackers did. They gained access. They looked for ways to laterally expand or escalate privileges and get more data. I told a very shortened story, the AstraZeneca story there, but it's all the same: breach, find data, find machine resources, or anything that leads me back. Why data? Starts with an R and ends with an ransomware. Ransomware attacks. There's a lot of money in that. If you read the Verizon DBIR, there's a lot of money in this. Don't go committing crimes. I don't encourage anyone out there, but that's why people are doing it. Machine resources, same exact deal. They want to crypto mine, make that Monero or whatever it is. And that's what they're actually after. They're money motivated. We're not making their job any easier because we keep posting these passwords to places where they shouldn't be. So instead of, hey, I have to break into your vault system or your hardware security module and figure out all that nonsense, well, not nonsense, but that layer of protection, they're just finding their way in and finding, hey, there's all these passwords just laying around. Let's see what they go to. Last year, we found over 10 million secrets just on public GitHub. You can download a report about this. It's about 1 out of 10 committers have committed a password to their code just on public GitHub. In private, it's probably higher than that because you have the perceived safety of there's a private repo. We're in this cat and mouse game where we know how the attackers are going to basically behave. We know what motivates them. This isn't a secret. The research is there. It is organized crime, for the most part, attacking us to get money. Very simple. And we know the pattern. So knowing the pattern, we should be able to set traps that will set off alarms and let us act very quickly. Because on defense, that's the best we can do, is act very quickly and put the attacker on their heel. Remember, these attackers do not have unlimited time and money and bandwidth. If it's too hard, they're going to move on to an easier target. And it's not running the person beside you. It is, hey, let's shut them down. Let's, in the right circumstances, alert the proper authorities. And that's all work together to make the world a safer place. But that starts with knowing they're there immediately. So cyber deception, that's what I pitched this as. And that's what really at the heart of it is. We need to trick the attacker into doing something to give themselves away by putting something alluring out there. And there's a long history of this. We can go back as far, arguably, to the Trojan War. The Trojan horse, about 1200 BCE. Homer is a very hard person to nail down a date on. But yeah, they thought they were getting a big old horse, and inside there was a bunch of defeat. We still use this today. Trojan horses are still a problem, but they've changed and very small and live in our machines now. Art of War, Sun Tzu says it very succinctly: appear weak where you're strong and strong where you're weak. I think this is the plot of one of the Karate Kid movies and definitely one of the Rocky movies. Yeah, we want to mislead and draw the attention away from where our real strengths are and make the attacker do what we want them to do. Ghost Army, if you're not familiar with this story, go look this up. There's a beautiful documentary about this out there. The Ghost Army is a story of us not having enough tanks and planes and bombs and guns to hold North Africa in the early days of World War II. We hired a bunch of artists to make giant inflatable fake tanks like the one you see there, and planes, and played very loud noises in one direction. So from a distance, Rommel's army thought, hey, they're fortifying over here. Meanwhile, we snuck all of our actual military equipment into other ports. And we all know the story of how that ended, or the ending to that story. Let's jump up to computer science, because I know those are a little bit ethereal, but human beings have been doing this stuff for a long time, is my point. Honeypots. So if you don't know the story of honeypots, the Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll. It's a great read. It's very short, really fast read, I should say. And they made a beautiful Nova special about this in 1990 called the KGB, the Computer Me. That's a screenshot. You can find it on YouTube. Highly recommend you watch it. It's really entertaining. And it's at a level where people really didn't understand what computers were. So it's a very interesting and entertaining episode. But anyway, very long story short, working at a computer laboratory, noticed there's a discrepancy in their billing system, chases it down to find that there's an attacker who is breaking into their system and stealing time, and military sites and stealing their time. Tracks it back to Eastern Germany in 1985, and he keeps hanging up before they can get an exact trace on exactly where this guy is, because how many hops are being made. His girlfriend suggests, well, just put a bunch of fake data on your servers and let them download that, and it'll take them forever. And it did. It took them hours, and enough time passed that they were able to track him down. And it's a great story, espionage, some really weird facts involved in it. But Cliff Stoll is why we have the term honeypot, and thanks to his girlfriend. Fast forward in time a little bit further, Fred Cohen realizes the honeypots should be a standardized approach to security. They've been getting big, but they were very, very self-built and very varied in how people thought about them, put them together. So he puts together TDK, the Deception Toolkit. There's a lot of reading you can do with this, and it goes very, very deep. If you've ever deployed this or used this inside your organization, please hit me up. I would love to talk to somebody that actually used this back in the 90s and get your first-person account of it, because all I have is the docs and a couple little videos out there about it. Well, that's cool and all if you have the time and the chops to actually build something like that across your network. But of course, if you can buy it off the shelf, why would you build? And if you're a large organization, we're probably going to at least consider that. Well, that's what Alfred Uger thought. And so he built CyberCop Sting, the first official commercial honeypot solution out there. And this is one of my favorite quotes in all of security is, hackers aren't kids on a digital joyride. Yes, there are hacktivists. Yes, there are people that are just trying to make other websites look bad. Yes, there's international terrorism and nation-state actors that are trying to steal secrets. But the majority, and I think it's 80%, according to the Verizon DBIR report, 80% are organized crime. So this is very financially motivated. So using tools to fight back makes a lot of sense. Well, let's keep the conversation going with honeypots and Augusto. In February 21st, 2003, said in the forum, I've been playing with this idea and I've been calling them honeypots. It's basically data that shouldn't flow over the network. It's something that moves that shouldn't move. So instead of building a whole honeypot, which requires a lot of know-how and equipment, you can just basically tag a file and say, if this moves, anyone opens it, if anyone moves it, let me know. And that's where HoneyToken was born. Fast forward in time a little bit more, and there's a lot of conversations around this out in the world. I'm very trying to summarize this as quick as I can. A company called Thinkst out of South Africa releases this particular commit, which adds AWS tokens into their HoneyToken generator. It's still out there. You can download it yourself, and we'll talk about running it later. They also made it available on their CanaryTokens website eventually. This is where we think the modern definition really takes off of a decoy credential that allows access. Fast forward to this year, I was fortunate enough to be at RSA. The talk that I was sitting through so I could see Eric Idle, who would perform next. Yes, that Eric Idle from Monty Python. The person right before him was Kevin Mandia. Might be familiar with his company, Mandiant, Google Cloud. But he really talked at the end about we can build very big defensive walls and fortify our barriers, but we have to prepare for the fact that attackers are eventually going to get in sometimes. It's just a reality. And you can see it down there toward the bottom of his screen. HoneyTokens account bait are one of the ways to protect yourself. And that's really what I want to talk about for the rest of this is what is a HoneyToken, how to build them, where to get them, and how to deploy them. So HoneyToken has a lot of definitions. Again, we saw it's a piece of data that shouldn't flow. But in the modern setting where we at GitGuardian define it as a decoy credential that doesn't allow any access, but instead reveals an IP address while sending you an alert that says someone's in the system. Or something has access to that HoneyToken because now it's been publicly exposed. I know that says a little bit different there, but we'll try to sum it up. Very importantly, though, HoneyTokens need to look identical to real credentials. You get in and it literally reads, this is a trap. No one's going to ever try it. Or you tune in reality, you would tune your grep scripts, your regex to say, hey, if it looks like this, ignore those. Those are obviously traps. So we need them to look very real. That's a very real HoneyToken on the left. I don't think it's active, but you can try if you want. It doesn't actually go to anything. So how do you build these? Well, again, there's a lot of ways to build these. There's a lot of ways to think about these. The way we think about it looks like this, and we released this publicly. This is the GG Canary project. All you need is a little bit of Terraform knowledge and a little bit of AWS knowledge, and you can be building HoneyTokens to your heart's content right after this presentation, or even during if you really want to get going quick. You won't find this picture in that repo. That's on a blog post over on the GitGuardian website about this repo, but I like this because it explains what we built. So Terraform builds first a set of users, puts those users in a list. Anytime someone tries to access AWS using those credentials, CloudTrail saves those entries into a bucket. A Lambda function checks the entry in the bucket against the list and sends off an alert if it's been used. That alert can look like Slack, AWS, SES, or SendGrid out of the box. And it gives you what CloudTrail gives you, which is IP address, user agent, timestamp, and the action that the user was trying to perform. That's one way to build HoneyTokens, and you can go build them on your own because you do have a lot of options out there. I want to reiterate, there's not just one way to do this. There might be a one way that works best for your organization, and I encourage you to go and look at the options. The first one is just completely DIY. I showed you the diagram. I've talked about data that doesn't move, going manually setting individual file permissions to set off alarms. There's third-party tools that do things like that inside of Windows and Linux systems. But that's one way to do it. The problem is DIY is, well, it's DIY and you're on your own. There are open source solutions. GG Canary, one I've already talked about. Space Siren is the descendant of Space Crab, which was originally an idea out of Bitbucket that they ended years ago for various reasons won't get into on this call. But it does require some AWS know-how, but it works. Thinkst obviously makes canary tokens, and you can run it in Docker. You can build it and run it yourself and throw it out in Kubernetes theoretically. But most people don't do that with Thinkst. They use either one-off canarytoken.org, which are not just AWS credentials, but all sorts of interesting things. Fake credit cards, fake SQL files. And if you're doing a one-off experiment, it's not a bad way to get started, honestly. I have a few of those floating out there in the world myself. If you want to do that at scale with their tools, they sell that. It's called canary.tools. It's a paid version of what canarytoken.org sells, or canarytoken.org provides. We make the HoneyToken module. It does require you to be a Git Guardian customer. We're just coming out of beta right now. I think it was of last week, so I should update this slide. But this cross-references, our HoneyToken cross-references the other data we know about where your hard-coded credentials are throughout your source code and environments, to give you a more complete picture of what's exposed if something is leaked or an intruder gets in. Microsoft Sentinel is a product that works on Azure. I have no personal experience with it. If you are someone out there that actually runs this in production, let me know. I would love to talk to somebody that actually does. And CrowdStrike users that are listening, go talk to CrowdStrike reps about what they offer as far as HoneyTokens. I'm not a CrowdStrike customer personally, so I don't know, but it's in their docs, and there is a blog post about it, but that's all I really know. But it is an option. So what do you do with these? You built your HoneyToken, but how do you use them? Well, put them in your private environments. Everybody's probably just thinking up front, let's put them in our code first. And that's, I think, the best place to initially put them based on how attackers behave. Get in, look through any files you can find, generally version code, and look for some kind of credentials. They're not going to do this by hand. For the most part, we saw how to use a tool like TruffleHog or GG Shield, this thing we make, to look for secrets. You can do that for good purposes, for blue teaming purposes, through your code, but it works both ways. Someone else can use those same tools to go find all of your secrets if they have access to your code base. But the active scanning often involves a validation step. That validation step is what actually is going to trigger, hey, let's go try to use this real quick and return if this is valid. So we're not going to waste any time. So if we find 1,000 credentials, but none of them return valid, we know we really don't have anything. There's nothing I can exploit in that particular repo, move on to the next one. However, if they scan and it triggers, wait a minute, now I have an attacker that I need to deal with. Cut that dwell time down to minutes, not days. But you don't have to just go in your code. They can go inside your CI environment settings, documentation that's private, anything that's private, and that's very important. Your Jira instances, your Slack messages, put them in Vault. If you put it in your Vault system where you're storing all of your passwords effectively, I use Vault very broad here. So HashiCorp Vault, of course, is one of the main players that everybody knows about in secrets management, but there are many others. Azure Key Vault, whatever Amazon Secret Manager is, I think it's just Amazon Secrets, the Google Cloud, they all have some form of a vault. Put them in there, because if that goes off, you have some serious problems. Now, someone that's getting access that shouldn't have access to that particular key probably has access to everything else in there, and that's a major issue you're going to need to deal with immediately. When you're putting these out there, use a 1-to-1 ratio. Don't use the same HoneyToken across all your code bases, because if it goes off, which one did it go off in? Which repo got compromised? Keep it simple. At scale, you can do these. If you're building one-off, it's a little tedious, but the commercial providers offer scale solutions that let you script against it. So use a little bit of logic to, hey, let's build a half-formed Terraform file, looks like abandoned halfway through the project, stuff it in the middle of my repo, forget about it, walk away. No legitimate reason it should be there. Maybe a test or two will say, what is this in there? But generally, you just want to leave them alone. And then when they go off, you say, hey, well, that's the environment that got affected. That's where it got leaked, or that is what someone has intruded into. I mentioned it just a second ago, I kind of got ahead of myself, but automate, scale this stuff up. A little bash or Python scripting goes an awful long way. I built an example. I'm kind of embarrassed by it because it's not really well documented, but if you want to go see just the bare logic of how you would build these, that I actually used against my own personal repos, private repos, well, they're there. Think in terms of blue team with this. Unless you are specifically a law enforcement agent, and I have given this talk where there have been law enforcement agents in the room, this is a blue team thing. You are trying to get them out of your network. You're guarding your gates. You're guarding your treasures, your holy grails. You're not hunting them down. There is a very gray line you can cross almost immediately, unless you're a researcher who has gotten the right permissions. It starts getting tricky, especially with international laws and treaties. So know that you're going to use this data to protect yourself. It's very easy and tempting to put on a red team hat or a gray hat and start thinking, oh, let's get these people back. Used for defense. And this is a journey. I've heard this several times today to remind you that it's okay to not be completely done with the project tomorrow. Security is a long, never-ending journey. Even if you think, I'm going to get everything right this year, you still have to deal with the new vulnerabilities and threats and exploits that are emerging right now. That's never done. So start with one repo, start with one environment, start with one little test project, and grow it from there. I only have one do not, and this is a pretty big one. Do not purposefully put HoneyTokens in public places. Why? Because they'll go off almost immediately. It's fun to do for a little experiment. I'll grant you that. To see, hey, where am I being attacked? Let's throw one of our public repos, let's throw a HoneyToken out there and see how fast AWS scans it, how fast GitGuardian scans it, how fast Google scans it, how fast some random IPs out of Indonesia or India or somewhere else in the world scans it. But the whole point of HoneyTokens is to give you an alert that someone's doing something they shouldn't. Those scanners are working as intended. So all you're proving is the internet gets scanned if you put them in public on purpose. On the other hand, if you put them in a private repo and all of a sudden a public scanner hits it, you have a leak on your hands. How did it get public? Is the actual private repo now exposed, or has someone made a clone and pushed to a different repo? That happens more than you think. We think that it's a good chunk of those 10 million credentials we found were people accidentally doing that. So wrapping up here in the last couple minutes, we're just constant cat and mouse game, but we know how they're going to behave. We know the MO. Breach however they can, whether it's an exploit, a zero-day exploit, whether it's phishing someone's account, whether it's walking through and do some social engineering to find a password to something. But once you're in, it's always laterally expand, escalate privileges in order to laterally expand and escalate privileges until you either have made the money you need to make, ransom what you need to ransom, or done the nefarious thing you wanted to do. But we can use that to our advantage because we know that's going to always happen. Laying traps out there. I laid out multiple ways to accomplish HoneyTokens or honeypots. Honeypots are their own field in themselves that are really probably worth your time. You don't have to do this on your own. You can. There's a lot of blog posts. There's a lot of architecture diagrams out there about various ways to do this, but there are options right off the shelf if you have an enterprise to protect and have more money than time. Remember that you are not a law enforcement agent unless you are. So keep yourself out of trouble with this data and use it for good to defend. So again, I'm Dwayne. I live in Chicago. Go catch the Security Repo podcast. We got some awesome guests coming up in the next couple weeks. And hit me up on social if you have any questions. I'm NC Dwayne pretty much everywhere, including GitHub.